What was the significance of the 12 memorial stones of Joshua 4? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Joshua on Walking Through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
Today we're going to discuss Joshua 4 verses 1 to 9, but before we do that, let's read the passage. So if you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Joshua 4 verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Joshua 4, beginning at verse 1. And it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over the Jordan, that the Lord spoke to Joshua, saying, Take for yourselves 12 men from the people, 1 man from every tribe, and command them, saying, Take for yourselves 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood firm. You shall carry them over with you and leave them in the lodging place where you lodge tonight. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, 1 man from every tribe, and Joshua said to them, Cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, that this may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, What do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. And these stones shall be a memorial to the children of Israel forever. And the children of Israel did so, just as Joshua commanded, and took up 12 stones from the midst of the Jordan, as the Lord had spoken to Joshua, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel, and carried them over with them to the place where they lodged, and laid them down there. Then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests who bore the ark of the covenant stood, and they are there to this day. In our last lesson, we have Israel crossing the Jordan River on dry land after God stopped the river further upstream. This miracle, though similar to the Red Sea crossing, is not exactly the same, for in the Red Sea crossing, God parted the Red Sea, whereas here, God simply dried up the Jordan River. Both were miracles in that both were caused by God directly, who, when he did so, also immediately dried up the ground underneath the water, allowing the crossing to take place. Coming to chapter 4, we find that Israel has now completely crossed the Jordan, when God tells Joshua to select 12 men. We noted that in chapter 3, these men were already selected, so what we have here in chapter 4 is Joshua simply reiterating this command here because of what their task was, which was to take the stones out of the Jordan River from where the priest's feet stood firm. By stones here, we're not talking about pebbles. We're talking about larger rocks. The reason 12 men were selected is because they would each represent one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Each tribe would thus select 1 man able enough to carry the stones to accomplish this task. Where would these stones be carried? To the place where Israel camped that night, which later on in the chapter is identified as Gilgal. On our map, we find that this is not too far from Jericho. Now, why were these stones to be retrieved in the first place? Well, they were to be memorial stones that would mark for Israel the miracle that God had done for them here. By having these memorial stones, Israelites would be able to tell their children about the miracle of the Jordan River crossing and show them the sign that God gave them to prove this story was true. These memorial stones would thus serve a similar purpose to the Passover service that we read about in Exodus 12:26 and 27, in that it too would serve as a memorial that later children would learn about as they grow up. The children of Israel are said to have done as the Lord commanded and carried these stones across the Jordan and placed them where they camped that night. Verse 9 is a peculiar verse to many commentators, for they don't know what to make of it. For verse 9 says that Joshua also set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan in the place where the feet of the priests who bore the ark of the covenant and these stood firm, and these stones are there to this day, meaning the day that this book was written. Now the question that many have is, why would Joshua do this? What would the purpose of these memorial stones have, seeing as how they were placed in the midst of the Jordan? This is where not reading a verse closely enough can cause us to be confused. Where were these stones set up? Where the priests stood. And where did the priests stand? Not in the middle of the Jordan, but on the banks of a flooded Jordan River. When God let the river flow again, yes, these stones would be covered, but only for a short while until the river returned to its normal banks, at which time the stones would be visible. So now you have memorial stones on both the east and west sides of the Jordan River. Now it is said here in Joshua 4 that these stones, or at least the stones at Gilgal, would be a sign to the children of Israel forever. Does that mean that these stones exist today? Well, perhaps they're there, covered up by the sands of time, but perhaps they're not, as some claim to know where they are today, though this cannot be proven absolutely. But we need to remember, forever in the Old Testament does not mean necessarily eternal. It means as long as their purpose was needed. When we read Amos 4 verses 4 and 5 and Hosea 4 verse 15, we find that Gilgal became a place where the children of Israel would commit sin, meaning idolatry. So it is possible that God destroyed these stones at some point in time because Israel began to worship them. That is speculation on my part and is only given as a point to consider. Whatever the case, these stones were erected here as a memorial for Israel so that they could remember the time that they crossed the Jordan River on dry land. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Joshua 4 verses 10 to 24 as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.